Raindrops from your eyes.
Swollen images of glory in my mind at enlistment. Overhead a flapping red, white, and blue filling the distance. A grand divide between myself and conscientious convictions or belief systems that stop people from killing over religion. I was young and I was out of options in my mind. It was supposed to be fun, my obligations ill-defined. I'd be the one to take charge with a gun back in my mind. Without college or riches, no dreams are realized. Well, I never have the ladder the Marines to get me to first. Ain't nothing better than dress blues and the one spitting this verse. You see the world paying to the GI Bill, fat in the purse. My recruiter made it sound simple, a play get well rehearsed. Forever cursed to the ones who get young innocent signatures under the guise of from God and country their honor diminishes. Greed built a standing army when against the founders' wishes. Now free democracy conducts war games and peacekeeping missions. Ironic hypocrisy.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I scored high on my entrance exams on ASVAB and chose the 0341 with guaranteed Hawaii track. Graduated basic, now MOS school's where I'm at. A mortar man with a 35-pound gun on my back. Plus my rifle 8 pounds, 65-pound pack. I'm 18, weigh a $195 and feel jacked. 108 pounds on my back, a boot marine and Cadillacs. A short 20-mile hump, 4 quarts in my flat. After 7 miles, swear I hear my right foot crack. I'm an E1, tell my sergeant I think it snapped. He's an E5, shouts profit, don't feed me crack. You got 2 feet, compensate and don't fall back. After 4 more miles, my left foot joins in the act. Only 9 more to go, I walked them all, that's a fact. 1 certificate for intestinal fortitude, not having shat. And 3 months healing, lost Hawaii to Guantanamo, rap.
Sergeant Davy 12, who I met in 6th grade. Dress greens, patent leather, and a high top fade. My mind was made up, I couldn't wait to grow up so I could sign up, man up, and stop the corrupt. A champion for God and country. Just wait till they get a load of me, an unstoppable PFC. Private first class, polished brass. I wanted to kill all the black pajamas that were hiding in the grass. But with no war in sight, my plight to fight never took flight. So I trained during the day and got drunk at night. Set my sights on all types of glory. Fast forward to Afghanistan, totally different story. IEDs, enemies, no front line to see. 80 pounds of gear in the desert, I could hardly breathe. Blood-stained fatigues, very many colleagues sent home to the VA to live with PTSD. Everyday recruiters go to inner cities and ask for
falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I never let my children volunteer for the military to make the same mistakes as I did these days could be deadly. If they're drafted with Dodgers, my go back, stay ready. I support Manning and Snowden. You know where this country's heading. Global tyrant, hegemonic, bully police force, demonic practice, virgin sacrifice, bloodlust. All your wars valuing corporations over people. Vampire. This is sick worship by objects and pure evil. Material desires get more attention than spiritual. Benefits are based on profits, complaints aren't given view. Arms manufacture, supply both sides of conflicts. Do you have a problem with any of these statements or doubt their truth? I'm a father and a veteran, and I stand for peace. Julian Assange against our commanders-in-chief. But it's hard to be better when daily demands compete. I'm not ignoring the slaughter, I'm just trying to eat like you.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
Oh, Natasha, you're still muted. Oh,
Like, my volume.
thank you. You are muted should be the, I don't know, it should
The
be in the
theme?
history books. Yes.
Yes, the theme song of the pandemic.
Absolutely. I'll try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. We have a great show. I'm excited to be joined by Amber, who's been organizing, and we'll get into that. So you know the deal. Grab the link, share it on your page. If you have an organization page that you're connected to, share it there. We talk about this every week, but in case we have new viewers, the reason why we started Stand Down just about a year ago really was a reflection after the murder of George Floyd. We wanted to be clear to the military, particularly the National Guard, the active duty elements that were taking orders to go and raise the arms against their neighbors, and we felt like that was just wrong-headed, and so thus the title Stand Down, and we stay committed to that because we really have to have some honest conversations around policing, around what does peace really look like, what resources do our communities need in this moment. And so for the past few weeks we've been having intentional conversations, and what we're hoping to do is inspire folks to not just listen here for an hour, but roll up your sleeves and get engaged in your community and organize in any way that you can. A lot for some folks that's dropping off water. For some folks it's using your skills to be of service to the community in this critical moment. So I'm always here, glad to be here to talk to our guests, to have real conversations with folks who are doing the work. And so today is a reflection of that as well. One of the things that we always talk about is if you are active duty, if you are a National Guardsman, we have really wanted to create an opportunity for peer support. So we have this email here. You can email us at standdown@veteransforpeace.org. And what you will get is, you tell us confidential, your information that won't be shared. If you're in the Army, we have plenty of Army veterans to support you. If you're Air Force, we have that, whatever your branch, whatever your stripe, we have someone that we can pair you with for some peer support. And please use that. And not only that, we enjoy close relationships with other organizations, particularly the GI Rights Hotline, particularly in this moment, we're hearing how, not only those who are on active duty or guard, but also those who were considering going in on delayed enlistment and are changing their mind in this moment. And so, the GI Rights Hotline has really stood in the gap for years, but particularly in this time where folks are starting to wonder if they want to, participate in global imperialism, versus, staying home and creating peace in their own communities, right? So I share that to say one of the things that I'm hoping that again, just comes out of this is more community support, that you feel less alone, and that every week on Wednesday we'll be here. If you're out there and you like to come on and share your wisdom, your organizing that you're doing in your city, we would love to have you. Send us an email at standdown@veteransforpeace.org, and we can connect. Let's see, I'm so excited to get into this conversation. I just went right into it and skipped over the part that my name is Natasha. I'm
You're famous. We know.
Not really. At least I don't want to be famous. I want to be known for the work, right? And so, famous is one thing. I think being in community and being known for the work is really where my heart and where my calling is. But I spent 20 years on active duty after enlisting right out of high school. I had a 4-year plan. I had a, plan to come back home. I had a little boyfriend that I wanted to come back to. He was going to college and I was going to get my benefits to get, GI Bill and travel a little bit. And somehow that 4 years turned into 20. And, you know, my return home plan was just, you know, extended a bit. And so a lot of things have happened over the 20 years. I participated in a lot of things. I've, you know, been in places that few have experienced, at least in my peer group. And I didn't really process a lot of it until I retired, right? And so when I did, a lot of stuff came up. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I now know that it was moral injury. And, you know, a part of that process of unpacking it came when I met a Vietnam vet on the campus of University of Chicago. And it's been on ever since. I became a veteran for peace. And I'm really, you know, feel empowered in this moment to, you know, for all veterans who, you know, you are not alone. This is a space on Wednesdays that we can just be in community and just chop it up. So again, use the comments. If you have questions, if you have comments, reflections, we love to see that type of vibe in the comments. So please do that. And buckle up. I think this is going to be a good one. Amber, I am so glad to have you on. I really, you know, have heard so much about your work. And so to have you on today to just really enlighten us, I think you have like many veterans, you know, have a very interesting story and your on-ramp to this work. And so I really want to welcome you, take up space. Let's get into conversation. Do an introduction, please. Talk about your military history, and then we'll go from there and get into your organizing work. So welcome, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm really excited to be here and to talk with folks. My name is Amber. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently living on occupied Ocharisecoyan land, which is Minnesota. To be specific, I live in a suburb of Minneapolis. Just for safety, I'm not going to say which ones exactly, but I'm differentiating because it does matter when we talk about some of the stuff that'll come up later. And so let's see, I grew up here in Minnesota when I was 19, I guess, is when 9/11 happened. And I had never considered joining the military before. It was always something that like seemed as an option, but I wasn't really quite sure. But 9/11 happened and it felt like the thing that I should do. And so I just filled out one of those random forms, you know, military.com form. I don't care which recruiter contacts me. Like my entrance into the military was just so easy. Like I didn't make them work for it at all. Perhaps I should have. Perhaps if I had made them work for it a little bit, I would have found some of the answers that I needed a lot sooner. But I did join the Navy in May of 2002, and I went right into being a Master at Arms or a military police officer. So I come with this strange background of both having a lot of knowledge around policing and around the military, and not really liking either of those institutions lately, or for a while. And so I would say like my 10 years that I did in the Navy was, sometimes when I think about the details of what happened or like just incidents that I was part of or saw, a lot on the interpersonal level, you know, just like toxic work environments, just rampant misogyny everywhere. One of the things that sticks out to me so much from my early days, besides some inappropriate conversations that I'm not gonna like repeat the words of in this space, but like just being berated one day at shift change for having had the audacity to wear like a tank top, and not even a tank top. It's like a tank top would be outside of regulations, right? But like one of those wide shouldered workout tops while I was running on base. And I just got ripped up and down for it, and just, you know, basically everything short of being called a slut. And it's kind of like, but it's authorized. Like, what is, like, nobody could tell me what the problem with it was, but like, that was part of my first few months in the military, was just getting ripped up and down for existing. I also happen to be tall and broad shouldered. I also happen to be freaking smart, you know, and driven. And so when you add all of these things into a military environment, it makes you a target for two reasons. You either like become the target that every other woman is measured against, or you become a target for, like, you know, constantly being torn down. And I would say that that's a lot of what my 10 years was. It was always having to like fight for myself. It was a lot of internalized misogyny that I was enacting against others. I was sexually assaulted, and I just pushed it to the back of my head. Because I was drinking at the time that it happened. And if I tried to report it, I was going to get kicked out because I was still on an alcohol waiver, which oddly enough, it's too long of a story for here, also was gendered and gendered in the way in which that alcohol waiver ended up discriminating against me, because myself and one of my shipmates were going through the exact same process at the exact same time. And he and I caught up a couple of years ago. He never had to deal with any of the stuff that I did. And he himself would probably say it to this day. He was so much worse than I was, you know, not just like drinking wise, but in the impact that it had on the command and on his ability to do the work, sort of thing. You know, mine was like a personal impact, never impacted my work, never did any of that. But like just like the misogyny and discrimination that came out of it was absolutely just strange. But moving forward from that was my first few years. I started to question the military around year 7, after my second enlistment. I was actually in Baghdad on individual augmentee, and I could see from what we were doing that there was just a lot of waste going on. There was a lot of like people just sitting around not doing anything, but that what we were tasked to do specifically with trying to establish some sort of legal judiciary system in Iraq, and I'm just a teeny tiny cog in this, right? But I'm looking at these files before me and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, these files wouldn't fly in the US court of law. Like, how are they going to fly in this country where we're supposedly setting up a law? And this story is important to me just because I wish that I had had somebody whispering in my ear at that point. I wish that I had had somebody telling me, you know, that I could dissent, or like giving me some knowledge around why that weird feeling was in my head. But after that, I went to a ship, which was my last command, and I barely survived that command. Just with all the personal stuff that I had going on, the command basically wanting people to operate like robots, you know? You got 2 hours of sleep last night, you should be fine. Oh, you got breakfast, you don't need lunch, sort of thing. Just always being asked to do more and more and more with not just fewer resources and fewer people, but also like with very little support to even carry out the stuff that they're asking us to do. And I started to get really disgruntled. Disgruntled sailors, I do love them very, very much. And in the months leading up to our deployment, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died 2 months later. And just the way that I was treated by my command during this time really hit me hard, really hit me personally. And then I get back from his funeral and we end up getting deployed about 6 weeks early. So here I am, like just grieving, exhausted, going through all this stuff. And now I'm out in the middle of the ocean, dealing with toxicity, depression, sleep disorder, just all sorts of stuff that ships for Navy people, it's a really weird environment. It's like, I've been fine during this last year of the pandemic because a ship is so much worse. You know, here I can leave my house, I can call a friend, I have my dogs, they might make their voices heard during this podcast or during this webinar today. You know, but on a ship, you don't have spaces to retreat. You can't go anywhere. And, you know, when I start thinking like, oh, that water that has no end to it because we're in the middle of the ocean, feels safer or feels more comfortable, or looks like it would be safer and more comfortable than what I'm experiencing right now. Like, you really got to ask what is wrong with this environment, you know, that I'm in. And so I went through a lot of that. And in that last year also, there was, again, more discrimination and more sexual assault and harassment going on in our command, and just really, really not being dealt with well. And what hit me really hard about this from being a master at arms is that, you know, I was I was part of some of the investigation processes that were happening, you know, interviewing people or like trying to analyze what was going on. And it was hurting me because I could see how hurt the other women were by what was going on. And they're having to deal with everybody else questioning them, you know, and that nothing happened. I can't say nothing happened. One person did receive punishment. That's a fairly egregious case that actually ended up going before a court martial. But the others, in the other incidents, just like there was nothing. There was just no care to resolve these problematic, even dangerous individuals that were part of our daily lives. You know, just pass them on to the next command, let them be their problem. And through like a little bit of a want and a little bit of manipulating an administrative process that the Navy was going through, called Perform to Serve during those during 2000, let's see, now we're in 2011, 2012 timeframe, I decided to get out and go to school. And I was just so broken, absolutely broken. I got out and I could barely stay awake. I would say that if I hadn't been going to school, I probably would have slept 20 hours a day. I couldn't focus. I didn't have like the capacity to concentrate like I once did before. Several months went by. The VA kind of ignored my symptoms that I was describing. They're a lot better now. The first one that I went to was not good though, but I will now say that the Minneapolis VA has been just outstanding since I've been registered here in the last year. But yeah, I like no longer had functioning hormones. Like none of my hormones were functioning and they were low double digits, which I guess is really bad. So I'm like broken and I'm now in college and I'm trying to just drift through, you know, depending on the GI Bill to support me. And I start getting challenged in the classroom. And I love this. I love that part of my story is thinking I'm going to get out of the military and do like social work or something, you know, like let's knock out a sociology degree and then we'll apply to social work school and then I'll be able to solve the problem of sexual assault in the military. And I got into this like feminist theory class that my advisor had picked for me and I just wasn't having it. I was like, no, this is stupid. Feminist theory, blah, blah, blah. Well, long story short, by the end of the class, I loved it. It gave me like a baseline to start naming what I was feeling in the military, or like start describing some of my experiences. Much like you, Natasha, I now refer to my basis for organizing as moral injury. And I think that it can be kind of a gendered thing, because a lot of women and non-binary veterans that I chat with, they're their questioning of the military system starts coming out of that interpersonal violence that we experience, and not necessarily out of like experiencing combat or anything associated with assault on civilians, populations, or the countries that we imperialize and colonize. And so that's just something that I see or more and more in folks. And so I ended up going to graduate school for women's and gender studies, still focusing around military sexual trauma. Started learning about the community of veterans that advocate on behalf of folks around that. And I just took in so much information over and over and over again. Also going through therapy at the time, very important. And just end up realizing that what I was feeling, what I was experiencing on a daily basis was just part of this much bigger system of violence that the military carries out. That there's just so much erasure of knowledge and history and context around the military, around what people believe we're doing, that there's so much fear amongst active duty folks for speaking out, and that I started to push more towards getting involved in local organizing, racial justice, gender justice, that sort of stuff. And in 2015, I desperately needed a job. That's also kind of a long story, but I decided that I needed to get a full-time job before I finished graduate school, and I would just finish graduate school up whenever I had the possibility to. And I ended up becoming employed at UNC Chapel Hill as the student veterans coordinator. And largely, I loved being in this position. I really enjoy being in educational environments. I loved being able to help veterans transition, especially those that were like also kind of in there questioning their experience stage. Never really being pushy about it. I mean, like some people, one-on-one conversations, they knew who I was and like what my beliefs were, and so we would talk about it. But it was an interesting experience for me, and also I got to talk to staff and faculty about the military experience in a broader way than just veterans did all this and now they need to get a degree and here's how not to be an asshole to them. And so that was something. But for anyone who's familiar with North Carolina and UNC Chapel Hill, there's also just a significant amount of injustice still on that campus throughout the entire university system, that goes all the way back to the days of the university being built by enslaved people. And so there was big word there. There was a Confederate monument at the front of the campus that students had been advocating for years to have it removed, and the university wouldn't do it. In fact, the state made up a law. Oh gosh, I can't remember the details of it now, but the state made up a law and passed it that like monuments couldn't be removed from public spaces. So we'll just go with that. Like they just could not be removed from public spaces without all these complicated other factors coming in, which basically was specifically against this Confederate statue on UNC campus. And so because I was connected with organizers in the community outside of my job, I was also, supporting students and organizers that were agitating for this. And on August 21st of 2018, the community members and some students tore it down. It's actually a really great video. I love the sound of brass scraping concrete as Confederate monuments go crashing to the ground. It's honestly just the best thing. And I was there that night. I wasn't involved directly in this, but I was with the crowd. I got mad about something that one of the campus police did, and I called him on it. And the next day, I get told that he had called, or somebody from campus police had called my boss and asked questions about whether I had been there in an official capacity or not. And throughout the next several weeks, things just got worse and worse and worse. All the lies that you hear about protests now on a daily basis, that's the same stuff that they were throwing back in 2018. They were letting white supremacists, people that belong to pro-Confederate groups, onto our campus with police escort, and then like tackling students, arresting them, filing false charges, lying on the witness stand in courts of law so that people ended up with charges, and that those charges stuck. So lots of folks ended up coming out of this year with misdemeanors, impacting people's educational experience, impacting people's abilities to get jobs, all sorts of stuff. And in the background, I'm experiencing like some low-key agitation from some various campus police officers. I was also really vocal in my office about because my office was connected to a bigger office, so I didn't solely work with veterans. And so, just like a need to change our policies around how we respond to students in crises, can we remove police from some of these policies? And things just got worse and worse and worse. In April of 2019, our veterans building was out on the edge of campus. And so there were some other empty buildings next to it. We were largely by ourselves all the time, which has its pluses and minuses, by the way. But if anybody's watching from universities, don't put your student centers out in the middle of nowhere. I'm just going to say that. They're not going to get used. Students have better things to do than walk across campus half the day. And so I was leaving work after a really long day. Some other stuff had gone on that afternoon in regards to the police violence that had been continuing throughout the year. And the building next to me, as I was leaving the parking lot, there's all these like police officers and firemen or fire people and ambulances. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? It's like, I don't know what's going on. I'm really tired. I just want to go home, but I can't drive by this and not understand what is happening next to my building that has students in it right now. So I turn around and I go back and I see that some of the police officers are carrying paintball masks and have like little orange tips on their rifles. And mind you, I did this type of training for like 10 years, in the military. And I'm just so tired that it's still not processing in my head what they're doing. And so I park my vehicle, I walk through my building, tell my students, don't come outside. I don't know what's going on, but I don't want you guys outside. Well, these are adult men, right? They're veterans. They don't listen to me. They're both in their 30s. And for context around the situation as well, they're both Black men. And so they follow me. We walk over to the building next door. I sit down on the steps, and all of a sudden, right behind us, I hear pop, pop, pop. And I'm like, they are actually holding a simunition round training in this building and have no safety precautions set up anywhere. Like a sign so that people can't just walk into the training, maybe some barricades or barriers of some sort, no notification to us that this training was going on. And I lost it. I just absolutely lost it that day. And one of the firefighters walks up to me. I think he was the chief, and he's like, "You can't be here. It's not safe." And I said, I realized that, and that's why I'm not leaving until you make this a safe training environment. Long story, which includes them threatening my students for not showing them their ID, which they're not actually required to do. I was arrested 15 minutes later. And fortunately, somebody else on campus had come responded to a text message that I had sent. And so they were able to like rally jail support for me and make sure that I was taken care of. But I was in custody for about 3 hours. And then I was put on administrative leave for 6 weeks and then fired for not being able to work with campus partners, which again, police were like a very small part of my job. And I also believe that our office didn't need to partner with them as much as the university believed. And the second reason that I was dismissed was making an uncomfortable veteran center for people, which was specifically hitting me really hard because I had experienced so much gender discrimination in my job as well. You know, just people either dismissing me completely because I'm a woman, or like anything that I'm trying to say around let's help our people emotionally grow a little bit. Oh, that's too feminine, you know, that's not going to work. And I actually worked really hard to make sure that our veteran center was welcoming to minoritized veteran identities. So women, queer people, people of color, transgender women, you know, and we did a great job around this. Like, I don't think there's very few people that I don't think there's anyone that actually falls into those categories that would say that the center was unwelcoming, because I made sure that they knew that they were welcome there. And if anyone made them feel otherwise, that I would talk to that person. And so it was just a really hard hit around that as well. Almost 8 years later now, still experiencing such significant discrimination around my identity as a woman veteran. But also, admittedly, it was a kind of a relief. And so I took some time off. I ended up living in Georgia for about 6 months. I stayed with an immigration lawyer friend that lives about a mile from an immigration detention center. I did court watch there. I did some fundraising for solidarity funds to put on people's phone accounts or commissary accounts. Write them a quick letter, let them know that it was there. And unfortunately, in March of last year, so March 2020, my brother was really sick and I came back to Minnesota. He died and my family asked me to move back here permanently. And so that was the very first week of the pandemic. I spent a few months trying to get readjusted to being back in Minnesota. It's one thing to like move around as an adult, and it's another thing to, I think, to come back to a state that I know so much about, that is like part of my life. Yet I've never experienced this state as an adult, and I've never experienced this state as an adult outside of pandemic. So going into when last summer started, I had no connections here. And I still struggle with that a little bit because I'm an introvert. I have ADHD, so I'm constantly behind on stuff. And also just being really, really super cautious about the pandemic because of at-risk family members. So that kind of brings me up to being back here in Minnesota. So I was just going to pause to take a drink and see if you had any questions.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
You're like looking down.
No, I'm not. No, I have a note. I was actually taking notes because my memory is short. But okay. I wanted to make sure, like, your story is just, you said so many things that I was over here like, yes, that's it. There's so many things about being a woman, a Black woman, in the Air Force that when I say there was a lot of stuff to unpack, man, there was just so much about being a woman in the military that when you talk about pushing things to the back of your mind, like I feel guilt about doing that. I won't say guilt, but I feel like, it wouldn't be as compounded had I had the bravery enough. There's all that, right?
Yeah. But also having the bravery at the time would have resulted in backlash.
Oh, it did. So the final, it did. So that comes later, right? Okay, but when I was, when things were happening, the first time, I PCS'd or did a permanent change of station and moved overseas to Incirlik, Turkey, right? I remember so many things shocked me. it was the first time, you know, this was under Operation Northern Watch. I'm dating myself.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So pre-Iraq War was Operation Northern ONW, for folks that, you know, remember that time. And, you know, I was permanent party at Incirlik, but it was a place that was a deployed to location for many others, right? So we had, you know, it was a joint base. And man, the military sexual trauma was out of control. I'd never, like, you know, you hear the, you know, where you're my brother, you're my sister, you know, we go to the trenches together, we train together, you know, I got your six, you know, check my six, that sort of thing. And you get over here, or you know, we get over there, and it was rampant. And it wasn't just, it was a rape culture that was unchecked, because it wasn't just peers, it was command in many situations. And I remember a colonel who was having an adulterous affair with, you know, a 3-stripe, you know, airman, right? And it wasn't voluntary, right? Because rank has its, you know, all of that position power.
Right.
And I just remember when it came to light that he was allowed to be decorated and transitioned off, you know, to another command without accountability. And it happened over and over. And quite honestly, for the rest of, I mean, like that became the norm. And I pushed all of that behind. And then the Air Force came out, had this genius idea. I don't think it's genius. I'm just saying that. I'm being, you know, sarcastic here. You know, to create the sexual assault. What was it called?
Never remember which force has which acronym, but yeah.
So a victims advocacy program. So because the rape culture in Turkey was, you know, out of control, they created this program where, you know, we go in and we got trained by the sexual assault community, or you know, response community, and they teach you to be a buddy for someone who has experienced military, you know, rape, or, you know, those sorts of, you know, devastating crimes. And I'll tell you, that training was really just an indoctrination of, I mean, like, assuming even if you weren't harmed, you're untrained to deal with, you know, supporting someone who had just been through that. And so I said, now I know that I've taken on trauma from experiences that I haven't even had myself personally, because the stories are devastating. They're heartbreaking, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I've said is that it is a betrayal. It is the greatest betrayal to, you know, and many of these young women and young men. When I got to England, I still continue with that, you know, that victims advocacy. When I got to England, there was the first time I experienced a young man being, you know, assaulted on his first weekend at the base. You know, in England, you could drink at 18. I think it was 19. I can't remember. But, you know, being assaulted and, you know, being aware of his situation. And again, no real supports. They just slap this, you know, you have a buddy to help you through the reporting process, to go to your appointments. But in reality, I was nowhere near prepared for all of that. I continued doing that for 2 more bases. So it wasn't just in Turkey. It wasn't just in England. It continued on through, you know, when I was in Virginia.
That's incredible.
I have this incense here. I always do, because it gives the vibe, but it also chokes me up sometimes. but you know, when I think about you talking about, you know, witnessing and just your experience, and my heart goes out, because I'm just noting that I don't know a woman veteran that has not been impacted by the rape culture. That is so normalized that it's quite honestly shocking. So I'm curious, in this current moment where you hear the Defense Department talking about their new initiatives to address this harm, I'm curious, what are your thoughts there? Do you have, something that you say in the back of your mind that it's like, this isn't new? But I'm just curious, like, do you have some thoughts around this, I won't say new initiative, but really as a reflection of, a year ago, Vanessa Guillen, right?
Yeah.
And her family saying no more. And so now we have this new, and I'll just wrap up with this point. There's this new push that's now polarizing in the media.
Yeah.
It's really saying that the military needs to address it. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So this actually relates back to Chapel Hill again, because one of the people that they called in over the course of like 2 years to investigate the campus atmosphere and policing and stuff was Chris Swecker, who's a former FBI, blah, 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 State Bureau of Investigation person. He also headed up the Fort Hood report. And what he does, and I'm sure what the other folks who I don't know or know the history behind them, what they do is they're always going to investigate on the side of power. They want to know how to manipulate people within the system. And this is what I saw in the report, and this is what I heard in the testimony that I think was around March 16th or 17th, around Fort Hood. And that there's just 40, 50, what are we on now? 2022 will be 50 years of women serving as full active duty members. And they are still getting blamed for their own sexual assaults. This report had stuff about culture of underage drinking. Who cares? What about the culture of underage drinking leads people to believe that they can assault somebody else? What culture of underage drinking leads people to believe that if somebody else reports an assault, that person should now be ostracized, reprimanded, called a liar, that they're not able to do their job because they reported the sexual assault, not because they actually got assaulted and have a huge mental and physical, emotional toll going on right now, but just that I see things better. But part of that is because women veterans continue to put in the, can I swear on this podcast? Yes, because women veterans continue to put in the fucking work, and all of the advocates before in these like 40 years prior, have set it up for this moment. But now the advocates that are coming in, they're not necessarily looking for increased punishment in the system, because that is such a low bar. It doesn't actually change the culture. You're still going to have as many people assaulted, because punishing people doesn't change it for the other millions of people that are going to be part of it. And so, the bar has been raised by newer advocates that, no, we actually have to change the culture of the military. And that goes back to, just respecting each other as a baseline command culture. But also we have to examine what is the military environment. Like, we are accepting of that personal violence, and we push that violence on others, because then it takes up a lot of brain space. It takes up your capacity to challenge these larger types of violence that we carry out against other countries, or even the violence within our own community when we're talking about National Guard and the huge, huge amount of veterans that are also police officers. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, I don't trust the military for shit. I also don't trust them on, combating white extremism in the military, because the military in and of itself is built on white extremism. And but I do trust the people that are pushing for change and finally have a toe in the door. So we have to keep pushing. We as a community have to keep backing these folks that have their toe in the door, so that we can all force the door open together. and actually make some change. And some of that change is going to be, it has to be big. It can't just be letting women, letting queer people be more and more in the military. It's actually changing what is the purpose and function of having a standing military. And the more that people just want to keep pushing, like, we have to be everywhere, we have to be world police, and we have to do this, and we have to fight for resources, like, that's never going to help. We actually have to scale down. I am one person who will say, I don't have a solution. What should the military look like? But I do know that it shouldn't be this. And that's what I want to start doing, is pulling it down. And then once we get it down to a level that we're no longer, spread out all over the globe, enacting violence, ruining people's infrastructures, destroying beautiful islands all over the world, then we can start talking about, okay, what might the purpose of a standing military be?
So on point. And that's been on this journey, right? So,
yeah,
it's a journey to, sort of shake yourself out of the patriotism and the unit camaraderie and the mottos and all of that. And then to come, I don't know about you. You talk about at the 7th year, you started questioning what you participated in. I started feeling that and didn't know what to do with it. And I resonate when you said, I wish I had someone that was whispering in my ear at that time. And I don't know what I didn't know, right? And so, but I do know that I started feeling like this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, but then you get to that 13th year mark and, you have mentors who are saying you might as well crawl to the finish. All it is, right? It did not feel, there were many, many years that I just sort of tucked that in and kept going, but for those, out there who, may be listening, we have a growing number of, VFP members who are on active duty, right? Who are joining. And so, that's something that I wasn't conscious about when I was on active duty. So I'm curious if you, sort of have some advice for those folks who are, who are still on active duty, who are questioning, where, what they're participating in. What's your advice to folks? What was your advice when you helped? And also just kind of leaning on your experience too. I'm curious to know first, how did you help those veterans who are transitioning, who question what they participated in, and then sort of bringing it forward? How are you using that in your work, or to inform your work that you're participating in right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tried to just be available to talk, and more to listen than for me to actually talk. I didn't push my views on folks, but I would just say that people that had marginalized identities, they knew that they could trust me. And so they would talk about just anything. We had great women's breakfast. We had a few. One of them, I had bought a bunch of books written by women veterans, and I had wrapped them up, and people could just randomly choose them. And I had made a PowerPoint just to briefly talk about the subject of each book. And I was like, ladies, I swear I didn't do this intentionally, but every single book includes sexual assault. And they're like, yeah, that's part of our experience, So we sat around and talked about assault and discrimination for 20, 30 minutes. And then folks would kind of break off from there to have their own conversations in other places that they connected. And I think that's a really important thing that I'm just remembering now that the students pointed out to me, and then I would see over and over again, is that there was something beyond what we did in the military that we could connect with each other on. And so folks would, the few transgender women veterans that I supported, they would talk to maybe about their transition or challenges that they had in the classroom, or just that they couldn't connect back to their units anymore because they didn't feel safe, even though up until they transitioned, they had kind of relied on that. the students of color knew that they could have conversations about that in the Veterans Lounge, and that's not necessarily something that I would hear from other people who did my job at other universities, that they could have these conversations without them devolving into like a racist, sexist rant, you know? And so just kind of being there and knowing that they had the space to have these conversations and the opportunity to help others see, like, I think was really, really important. And if somebody asked me something directly, I wouldn't lie to them. You know, I'm never gonna hide who I was. But also, where was I going with this? And I wouldn't let falsehoods perpetuate either. And I think that was a big part of the training that I did, is I wouldn't just let it be about combat, you know, because most people that are in the military don't experience combat. So why are we, you know, it's a huge thing and it definitely impacts people's transition. But as we've discussed here, there's a whole lot of other stuff about being in the military that also impacts people quite a bit. And so really trying to just open that up, and so that folks, because I was only one person, you know, and not everybody's going to come to me, especially men would not necessarily reach out to me for assistance. They would only reach out to male students, who often ended up coming to me for the answers anyways. And so just making other people on campus more aware of a holistic veteran military experience was really important. And I think about that a lot now too, when I do think about talking to National Guard or trying to do some counter recruiting. I'm not out there doing a lot of counter recruiting, but you know, if anybody brings it up, a family member, a stranger, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not a good idea. Like, do you have a few minutes for me to tell you why? And just bring up a lot of that day-to-day stuff. And it's like, is it worth it? Is it worth it to have a college degree when you know that your degree is born out of 10 years of trauma and pain, being suicidal, and that, you know, my role, however small, contributed to this 20-year catastrophe that we have currently going on in Afghanistan and Iraq and many other places around the world.
That, oh man. So yeah, you said a mouthful there. You know,
I can talk.
no, I mean, that's the reason that you're on. And I want you to take up space here. But, you know, one of the things that I think about too, when family members, you know, question, you know, but you have these benefits. And I'm like, it's nowhere near the debt that, you know, I mean, I don't know. I look at this like, you know, you go into this thing for, you know, the GI Bill and, you know, whatever benefits are there, it does not rise to the level of harm, of stuff that I, you know, deal with. That I don't know. I'm now what, five years retired, and you know, I'm like, okay, when does this, all this stuff sort of subside? And most folks are like, never. You know, to be a veteran is to consistently process these. There's different triggers. I live in a city where we have, you know, perhaps one of the most rogue police departments that, you know, willfully, you know, violate the constitutional rights of folks, particularly Black men, women, and their children. Low income, those with specialized needs, and folks from marginalized communities. And so when I see them, you know, equipped in their MRAP vehicles, you know, which, you know, to my knowledge was for war, not that they should have been used in the desert either, but just to see them, you know, this militarized police department that we have that look like special operators. You know, if you're a military unit, looking, you know, every time you come out to serve a warrant, it's like someone, you know, they're going on a deployment, on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And those are it's triggering in ways that I still haven't found words to explain to folks, like why I say fuck the police, and I mean that, right? And it's born out of just a lot of things. Before I joined the military, you know, I lived in you know, Inglewood, which is a disinvested community, and I saw how cops treated, you know, people that looked like me. I saw how they treated family members who didn't deserve it. And then to, you know, sort of come to, I saw how military police treated, you know, Black airmen and Black soldiers, right? And how, you know, they pulled them over, you know, and, you know, sometimes in career ending or impacting ways. And, you know, and I saw, you know, my white comrades who, you know, would get slaps on the wrist for those infractions. So I've always sort of had this antagonistic or just real life experience with cops. So there's so much that I think about, like my military experience, that really does parallel quite closely with police. So I know you do a lot of work, and this is really why I was especially excited to like hear from you. So I didn't know that you were a previous military police. And to hear your story and how you were sort of, I don't even know if that was your radicalized moment, radicalization was at the campus, but I'm curious to hear what was that on-ramp from sort of unpacking that military police experience. 10 years is a long time to be in that space. And then talk to me about the work and organizing that you're doing around talking to National Guard, because I'm sure you're using the context of your experience to sort of guide you in the organizing that you're doing in Minneapolis, you know, after the murder of George Floyd. So if you can just sort of bring us from your military police experience and how you use that to inform the work that you're doing with anti-recruiting or counter-recruitment and organizing with National Guard.
Yeah, I want to back up just a second. And you know, the parallel to your childhood experience with police is just so different from mine. I grew up in a rural, largely white community. My next door neighbor, who still lives next to my mother, was the chief of police. And it was exactly like you know, Mayberry sort of thing, in which they'll drive you home if you're drinking. You know, context dependent, but for the most part, I never feared police. I thought that like joining police might be a noble thing to do, which is why I was so up for it when the Navy was like, absolutely, we're taking, you know, security police officers, because they went from like 1,000 to 15,000 over the course of 18 months. Horrible idea, by the way, Navy. But I quickly started to see in my training and in my first command, where I was actually on patrol, how always men, and quite often always white men, escalated stuff so quickly, you know? And it's like, it became a kind of a joke. Like, you actually want to break up a bar fight, don't send any of the men, send me and one of the other women in, because one, the guys get distracted. Two, we don't try to escalate anything, you know? And it's just kind of like, that ended up being my experience over the 10 years. And so I would say that my radicalization was before Ferguson, but definitely hit hard during Ferguson. And I wasn't yet involved on the ground or anything, just really, you know, kind of going through the process of understanding, using Facebook a lot to share information and knowledge and, you know, stories, getting a lot of hate from folks. And like, I don't care. I still am on Facebook. I don't post as much like personal. I don't engage in conversations as much anymore, but I still use it because over the years, I've seen people that like push back on me and during Ferguson are now Black Lives Matter, police need to change, or be defunded, whichever one they want to go with. I'm okay as long as they're moving in the right direction, right? I'm not going to shame them for that. But let's see. So that was 2014, I believe. 2015 is when I actually did like my first direct action, which was interrupting a Trump campaign rally. And again, there, like, me being a veteran meant nothing. I got spit on just like everybody else. I got dragged. Well, I didn't get dragged out. They couldn't drag us out because we were up really high. So they actually like just follow us, escorted us out down the stairs, sort of thing. But I watched a couple of men of color that had been down on the floor get like punches thrown at them and get dragged out either by other rally attendees or by the cops themselves. And yeah, that I would say that was kind of the moment, like the moment that I felt standing up in that arena, having listened to Trump talk for 45 minutes and having like just experienced that. And like my friend that was sitting next to me, they're an immigrant from Ghana, you know, and just like feeling a lot of fear for them as well around what could happen if the people behind us lose their shit or something, you know, if something worse than throwing paper and spitting on us happen. And yeah, just I would say that was really my big moment of like, okay, there's no going back now. Like I do direct action when I can. And so I moved back here to Minneapolis or to Minnesota, like I said, last March. Was just kind of keeping to myself with my family for those first few months during the pandemic, processing our grief, planning to go back to Georgia to get my stuff, all this stuff going on, trying to find a job, which is hard. And then George Floyd's murder happened, and I didn't make it down. Oh, actually, my dog got put to sleep that week too. So the day after that is when I was finally able to go down to Minneapolis, and I know nobody, you know, I haven't been involved. I'm an introvert. It's like this whole pandemic thing is just really throwing me off this last year. And I would just like gather up my medic bag and go. I'm like, I'll find people when I get there, right? And I sort of did. I walked around with some other medics that I met, and then I just was like following the crowd. And so in Minneapolis, there's barricades on each side of the light rail that we have so that people can't just run across them. And so there's a whole crowd of people between a barricade and the sidewalk, which I guess was the back of one of the police precincts, not 3rd Precinct. This was another precinct. But this was the same night that 3rd Precinct got burned down. And it's just a mass of people, right? And all of a sudden, these 2 cop cars come flying through the crowd, pepper spraying people. And I'm like, as ready as I am, like I do credit a lot of my military experience and training with being able to respond appropriately. I was already doing emergency medical services before I joined the military, so I was in that mindset, but I would say the next 10 years definitely honed it quite a bit. And I'm just looking at this happening, and I'm like, they're literally driving through a crowd of people that can't move. You know, so people are scrambling over the barricades. They had already stopped the light rail, you know, whenever they had stopped it, but long before the rally even started that night. And then it's just like 2 straight hours of tear gas, stun grenades, pepper spray, and, you know, responding to people experiencing all of this. And then it kind of chilled out for a little bit. I stuck around for a few more hours. And I had never, ever since boot camp, you know, I hadn't actually been tear gassed since boot camp. And I was just like, and feeling the effects of that over the next few days. And just like, holy shit, that really happened. And I know that happened every night that was out, almost every night that folks were out there. But I live about half a mile away from one of the National Guard buildings. And so I think it was the next day or something, I was driving And all of a sudden I see the whole parking lot is full of vehicles. And I'm like, what the hell? No, I didn't think that this place could hold so many soldiers in it. Well, it couldn't. It turns out they were actually using one of the public buildings next door. So now here is our public building paid for by our city tax dollars for children to have recreational events in it, being used as like a staging ground for the armory. And I don't know if people were sleeping in there or not. I actually have a data request into the city around that. You know, what is the agreement for use of public facilities and roads and all of that? But yeah, I ended up, again, don't know anybody. I was just like, fuck it. I'm just going to take my stuff. I'm going to make a sign. I'm going to go down there and stand across the street and see what happens. And I actually ended up making a friend. We're still friends. I need to meet up with her soon. But she and some other folks came and stood with me. The guard folks came over to see what we were doing. Of course, you know, that whole nice way that they do that. And the next day we came back with a lot more people and did that for a little bit. And I think that might have been the end of that deployment last year. I'm sure, like many of you, the last year is kind of a blur for me at certain points. And so I felt like we didn't get to approach anybody. You know, the National Guard does a really great job of segregating folks out. And so as an organization with About Face Veterans Against the War, we were doing a lot of advertising or pushing out on social media, like you can contact us, you can contact the GI Rights Hotline, somebody can support you throughout your deployment if you just need someone to talk to or send information to. So, you know, there were several of us doing that. I know that we were able to get in, talked and support a lot of folks. There was a few articles done on that last summer. I can't actually remember how many calls ended up coming into the GI Rights Hotline, but folks were really, really questioning what was going on. And then it kind of felt like everything mellowed out for a bit. And after, so the National Guard ramp up in Minnesota started again right as the Derek Chauvin trial kicked off. So if folks have not seen, there was lots of just barbed wire, concrete barriers, 10+ foot fences being put up around various places. And then Dante Wright was killed by Officer Kim Potter in Brooklyn Center. And that, I went up the second day during the afternoon with some flyers for the National Guard folks. And the flyers are really useful, but like hardly anybody comes to grab them. So I just kind of like held them against the fence and like talked at people. And this again comes back to like women in the military and moral injury. None of the guys would even look at me when I was talking. But the women, the first one acknowledged that I was talking, even though she wouldn't actually like come close. The second one, I'm not going to go into details because it was kind of a private thing, but it was actually a really meaningful moment between her and a Black woman that was there to, you know, make her voice heard, and they had a connection. And then all of a sudden, the Guard soldiers, like, her pocket is buzzing, you know, her phone is buzzing, and she's like, I gotta go. And she had a radio on her too. So I was like, yeah, somebody's watching her from inside the police building. And then the last one that I talked to, she and the other Guard member had actually turned away from me. And then, so it's kind of like, hey, you know, I'm not here to yell at you, because I think that's what folks are really used to, like getting yelled at or getting chastised. And nobody likes that. It's not that I don't support it. Like if that's what you feel compelled to do, but it doesn't get people to stand down necessarily, especially when we're talking to National Guard members. And so I just kind of like made a couple jokes about not being able to control the sound of my voice because I was in the military for so long. And she like turned, again, she didn't like talk directly to me, but she like acknowledged what I was saying. And as I was driving home from this, I was a little disappointed. I was like, okay, there was only 2 vehicles there that I could see. You know, they have fencing up everywhere, so I can't really approach people directly. And then all of a sudden, right as I hit my city limits, I'm like, what the hell? There's just these 2-3 parking lots just full of guard vehicles at 2 of the hotels. And I was like, did a U-turn, went over there. I was like, oh, I'll just drive into the parking lot. And then, you know, I can walk up to some folks. Couldn't drive into the parking lot. It was basically a fob. So fob DoubleTree is what I started calling it, because the concrete barricades are up. They had armed, quote unquote, condition 4, probably for the rifles. I actually forgot to look at the handguns, but, you know, they had guards at all of the entry and exit points. They had most of the parking lot closed off, and just probably 400 or 500 vehicles the first day that I stopped there. And I just sat in the parking lot just thinking about that for a while. And at this point, not feeling safe in approaching anyone by myself, especially with so much security around the hotel. And so that's when I reached out to the local DFP chapter. And Dave, who's awesome, got back to me really quickly, and we agreed to meet up later in the week, and did, you know, the 3 of us walked around, and I had gotten the GI rights hotline number printed on a large sheet of poster paper, and then I glued that to a yard sign so that even if people couldn't come up and talk to me or wouldn't come up and talk to me, they could at least see the number in our organizational name. Last year, I don't know which of our members did it, but they made this really incredible guide on how to talk to National Guard. I'm going to drop it in the chat here in a second. And I started sharing this. We have a Facebook group that is for Minneapolis, but a lot of folks, you know, from suburbs and stuff are involved in it as well. And somebody encouraged me to drop it in there. And I got a lot of good response on it. Like, folks just really interested in having something that they could say. How can I leave a comment here, Natasha?
If you actually just drop it in the private chat, I can pull it over and share it live.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that last one that I just shared there should be the How to Talk to National Guard guide. And so that was done in collaboration with About Face, War Resisters League, and the GI Rights Hotline. And, you know, some of the feedback that I got from folks who ended up seeing this was, especially folks who live in these occupied areas where the Guard was being stationed, they're like, I've been wanting to say something to them, but I didn't know how. And that becomes such a huge thing, because when we were talking to the Guard members as we walked around the parking lot perimeter, you know, you always have somebody that's going to talk to you, and it's always going to be the person who is going to refute everything that you say, right? And they were like, well, we've been in these communities and they like having us there. And it's like, because the people who support you will always be out there to praise you for being there. And the people who feel terrorized by you don't know how to approach. And so I think that the guide became super helpful for folks who wanted to have the conversation, but just felt so challenged on how to even start it. And just also folks who worked in, you know, veteran heavy spaces or had children or younger folks who were interested in having the conversation. So just got a lot of great feedback around that. And even for myself, it helped because, again, like, I can go off the cuff on almost anything, but you never know what somebody's going to say to you when you're out trying to do some counter recruiting or like trying to get people to see that they can dissent. And I felt that it was important to even engage in those more difficult conversations in hopes that maybe some of the younger, because there was always like a sergeant or higher, in hopes that maybe some of the younger folks can start to hear the contradictions as well in what they're saying, what I'm saying, and what they're actually experiencing out in the community. So that would always be like my end point. Like, hey, we're not here to harass you. We're just here to make sure you know that you have rights. Like, and if you question anything, if you want to dissent, if you want to get out of this enlistment early because you've decided it's not worth it, I can tell you as a fellow veteran that it's not. Like, here's a number that you can call. So that becomes the most important thing for me to get across to them. And anybody that's willing to engage in conversation from that is just super appreciated. And that has me thinking that I'm seeing a lot different reaction this year than last year. I see more people willing to engage, and I do think that January 6th was a big moment for folks to start questioning, like, what is the purpose of the National Guard? You know, like, they weren't called out to protect democracy on this day, so why are they called out to supposedly provide safety and protect democracy on these days? Before that, we didn't see as big of a contradiction. For January 6th, folks were still thinking safety, protection, community, assets, building property. And it's like, no, January 6th showed that was all a lie. So now we have this moment of the next step in my process is to have kind of an informal program like lined up, and I'm going to go back into that same group because there's a lot of folks in there. I mean, there's a lot of trolls, but we have just the most incredible moderators in it. They put in some work, but drop it in there again. And like, hey, if you're in education, I'm here. I can come in and speak about militarism. I can come in and talk to your kids about National Guard stuff. And I want to go back quickly to like, I don't live in Minneapolis. Like, Minneapolis is freaking amazing, and there's such a fantastic community down there. Just more and more, I'm seeing that some of the drivers of things that are really happening are people that are just so powerful, are fellow women veterans. And like, I can't wait to like just be able to go safely to all these spaces and really meet each other and like collaborate there. But that, where I live, we also have our own issues. We have a really like liberal city council and mayor. They have done some really excellent things in the past few weeks that I've started getting involved in understanding local politics again, but they're still very pro-police. And so there is this need, and I've started meeting some of the local organizers specific to my community, ones who are involved in politics here, like, and, starting to be like, hey, what are we doing around this? Can you connect me to this person? And I know we're probably at time soon. I don't know how long this was supposed to be, but, and that's something I want to hammer home. Like, these big events make things happen, but there's so much education and connecting and community building that have to go behind them. So, now my role is in developing a curriculum so that when I say I can come in and talk to your students or your organization, like, I actually have something to go in there and reference. And like, I'm a nerd by heart. I love history. I love reading newspaper archives. Like, I just do it for funsies. But I'm doing a lot around National Guard and being called out, to quell not just like movement for Black lives, but also like their long history of civil rights and labor actions in general. Like, it's so long. I have to have like a reference guide for it. And there is no straight reference guide for that right now. And that is what I want people to see. And we really have to start questioning why we want the people who carry out violence on behalf of the state in our communities to also be the same people responding to natural disaster. And that their response to natural disaster often is not done with the communities, in the way that we picture mutual aid. So I think I wrapped up all my thoughts there. Let me know if I missed anything.
No, you listen, Amber, you hit so many points. A couple things that come up for me is I remember not really understand. I won't even say understanding because that's not the word. Not, I don't know. I'm at a loss for how to sort of say this, but historically, the National Guard has not been a friend to the Black community, to
Mm-hmm.
indigenous, and marginalized communities. Period. Full stop.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We can go back to the Watts. We can go back to the righteous uprising in LA in '92.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, we can go to the assassination of Dr. King, right,
Mm-hmm.
in many cities, in my hometown in Chicago, what that looked like, and then the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, happening in our city
Mm-hmm.
at that time, and the loss of life and the violence that the National Guard brought here.
Yeah.
And then I remember, when you talk about natural disaster, something that I never really processed as much. But I remember I was stationed in Nebraska at the time, and we had a huge drive, and there was massive donations. And I remember a few officers and senior enlisted folk drove trucks of goods to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that they came back and told was often disrespectful to the people that needed grace, needed compassion. They needed folks to open up their chest and give. So it was, it's not just about the charity, but it was how they engaged people that was disgusting to me. And then, we see this. We see the images of, I think it was retired General Honore, who was out scolding his soldiers to put their weapons down. These people needed support, not an M16 pointed in their face. And so, no matter, the history point that the National Guard, and then I'm going to finish that thought. The National Guard has not been a friend of the community. And then you fast forward to the murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, and there's still, revelations happening on the ground as the Black man. I think his name was David. I know his name was David, the local business owner.
Barbecue owner.
The barbecue joint. He fed cops for free.
Yeah.
And on the very first night that Kentucky National Guard was sent to that community, that man lost his life when he shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Because situations were gaslit. And so, stand down for me meant something a little different, than traditional, because it's not just about taking arms up against our community in righteous moments. It is seeing that there's a very slippery slope between, what we consider military and combat, and seeing how that plays out through the National Guard in our own cities and communities. Right. And so a lot of times veterans talk about this distant thing that they experience, and we want solidarity and atonement overseas. And then for me and folks in my community, we're saying, but the military is an occupation against us. And not the National Guard. Damn, the police are militarized. I mean, they literally, I cannot tell the difference between the Chicago Police Department and, special operators.
Yeah.
They were getting ready to go out on a mission, right? And so we have to start to see the parallel between, it's not just the 1033 program. We know that that's what they use as an alibi or a cover to give these equipment to police, but it really is a complex. We talk about the military-industrial complex, but it really is this close connection between military and policing that devastates communities um, in moments where I don't know. I'm sort of like there's so many things that are coming up for me. But when we talk about the National Guard, really truly understanding the history, and I don't know that they do, right?
Yeah. No.
There's this long, devastating history of guardsmen being brought into these spaces, a lot of times, in joint command situations with the cops. They have, they don't enjoy, um, you know, thank you for your service in my community, right?
Yeah.
Where, there's just so much devastation there that I just think it's so important to hear you talk about the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
We haven't done that here in Chicago, but I now have this toolkit shared that now we can do something with that. The confliction of what we see when they're, showing up in our communities, trying to lock us down. After Chicago police have gunned down our 13-year-olds, our, seventh graders. Even today, not even, so that was a couple weeks ago. We saw the devastating images of Adam Toledo losing his life. Again, he's a seventh grader in Chicago public schools who was gunned down in the parking lot of a high school that he would have later matriculated to.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about that was, like a week and a half ago, and here's today is another video coming out of another young person who was gunned down by our police department.
In Chicago today?
Chicago. There's another video that's going to come out. He was gunned down. I think it was on the 31st of March. And here we have a mayor who was very quick to call the National Guard in response to, gaslighting the situation, to talk about, the people want justice. The people want, to not be gunned down by the state. And then to call in the National Guard to be auxiliary or augmented to the police doesn't gain favor to the military complex at all.
Yeah.
They are not our friends. They are not friendlies. And to see them sort of occupy our city in these ways is devastating. So now that I have this toolkit, I said all of that. Like I want guardsmen and folks who are in these capacities to really think about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And that it is not just, an order that you're taking. You really need to think deeper about all of this, because you could be that person who, later wakes up and, regret what you participated in. Yeah. And then, so I think that the work that you're doing is super important. Thank you for sharing this resource. I was just sort of scrolling through it, and I think that it's something I'm going to share with my community. I appreciate your leadership because I think it's, critically important. And this is one of those moments where we can, use our, heighten the contradictions, but also, do something about it. So thank you so much for sharing your whole story and experience. No, I mean that. And like, that's why I wanted you on. I was excited.
Yeah, there's so much.
There was so much hype about just your, your focus on the details. And I love that. I appreciate that. And I think that, not just coming on and talking about it, but actually having a toolkit that people can use to go, to in their communities is important. Grab that link in the chat. I want to give,
I just dropped one other link. It goes to my Twitter, but it's just a fraction of the times that the Guard has been called out in opposition to labor.
Okay.
And it starts out snarky because there was a issue around the Guard occupying one of the local union buildings and being run off. And then everybody and our governor got mad about that. So, some unions came out in support of the Guard and other unions didn't. And this was just kind of one of my replies. And like I said, it's just a fraction of the times that Guard has been called out against labor in our history. I didn't even get to civil rights in this one. So
Thank you for sharing that. I saw
yeah.
a question in the chat. Someone is reflecting that, this is really depressing to hear. And I try to strike that balance. Like, there's so much that comes up for me, but I want to like project that we aren't downtrodden. We can do something about it. So the question is, I love to hear what people like us can do to heal in situations. And I love, Greg, that you're asking that question. It's critically important. While this is depressing or, brings up a lot of triggers for folks, we should feel empowered to be in community, which is what I hear Amber saying is you use your experience to inform the work that you did at the collegiate level in academia, and then now you're using it in your own community and nearby communities to be to just be in solidarity. You got in your vehicle, you didn't know anybody, you now have a lifelong friend, or I won't say a battle buddy, but
no, I'm keeping Dave.
Yeah. I mean, Dave is amazing. When I first met him, there's so much that we can have another show about Dave.
Yeah, let's have a show about Dave.
He is amazing. He has a gift. He's a highly a people person, and I'm sure he'll navigate spaces with just his personality.
Yeah.
But there's no task that is too small for you. Again, if it is just donating, if you see people in your community asking for your support for survival aid, some people call it mutual aid. I think it's survival aid, quite honestly. But if you can get in your vehicle and go and stand the line in any way, be a vessel. I'm not one to go out and stand the line, so to speak, for a myriad of reasons. There's just so much tension that comes in those spaces. But I am behind the scenes, and I use my skills around writing, around supporting folks, around galvanizing folks to go into those spaces. So if you're, organizing is just so many roles and so many hats that you can take depending on your ability to do so. So Greg, let's not be depressed. Let's be empowered. Amber, what would you share for Greg, who has that statement in question there?
Yeah. I also don't have the capacity to be everywhere that I would like to be, just physically even. A 2-mile walk with the students the other day killed me for the rest of the day, sort of thing. And so I have skills that I dig into. I can do a lot of education. I can do a lot of administrative. I can occasionally go out and throw down and medic, that sort of thing. And so, I don't try to be everywhere, because spreading myself too thin doesn't help the movement, and it doesn't help me at all. And I spent a lot of time with the front line last year, leading up to the elections. And I just love the idea of bringing joy into every day, appreciating each other. Make sure you know who your circle is. Like, hey, can I check in? Like, know who has boundaries about what as well, because I think that's such an important thing, is to like know who you can turn to for what, without necessarily like bringing your trauma into other folks. Making yourself a nice coffee. Adopt as many dogs as your city ordinance will allow you, which is my top tip for everything. And appreciate what you have, who you have, and the gains that we have made. Because if we only look uphill, we don't see the progress that we've made to this point. And I think that's really important. And yeah, just bring joy into your life as much as possible, and take breaks. It's important. Don't take breaks while you're in the middle of like a barrier or something, but recognize that like the next day you may need a little downtime. And you can't do everything for everybody, but you can do something really good for some people and make an impact.
Thank you, Amber. I have said not publicly. I have said that women veterans are superheroes
We are.
listen, a lot of times we were put into positions that we had to lead our units. We were no matter our age, we were the mother of our units, and in spaces we had to talk people down. We had to encourage folks. Women veterans have assumed so many roles and have so many skills. So if you know one, embrace them, bring them into your organizing spaces. I guarantee you won't regret it. But even
and treat them well.
Oh my God.
Treat them well.
You have to, it's mandatory. It's mandatory.
Yeah.
I've
left a handful of spaces.
Yeah.
Because of the way just men veterans, especially, before I found About Face, and like, this is my home now. I love my people. I know that we support each other. I know that if I have a problem or if somebody's doing something to me that's not right, I can call them in on it and get support. And again, like, somebody can call me in on something, and I know that I will be walked through the process of coming back into righteous, community with each other, and not just like booted out sort of thing. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amber. You have an open invitation.
Thanks.
Whenever there is something on your heart. I know you have podcasts and all that that is important, but I'd love to have you back.
Well, thank you.
Talk more in depth as the weeks grow. I want to just say the weeks, but we really want to have a space where we stay in community with folks that are doing the work. And so we can talk about what organizing should continue to look like, because I think this is an opportunity moment. A lot of folks say like, hey, if this is what I would have done during the civil rights era, or this is what I would have done if I was on the campus of Kent State, or whatever draws you. This is a moment that I think is for the history books. And there's a role for all of us. So this is an all hands on deck moment. No matter if you embrace police or not, you should also embrace your neighbors. So you don't have to have the same sentiment as others, but I think that there is a way and a space for you to join in, even if it's talking to most important work is talking to the folks who are doing the harm in this moment. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your leadership and your determination, Amber. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for bringing me on, Natasha.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Y'all have a great night.
You too, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Another great Wednesday, another great conversation. I know we went long today. It's all good. And so we'll see you all next week, Wednesday at 4 Central, 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific. Peace, y'all.